As much as I'm really disappointed with Battlefield 2042, the whole launch and the content delay, pretty much the way everything has panned out here, I just can't not pay attention to what's going on with this game. A couple of days ago, EA held a town hall meeting. These things happen roughly every 3 months internally, and they go over what's happening at the company, and it gives various teams a chance to speak about certain projects and different situations. This one, apparently, focused quite heavily on Battlefield 2042 and the fallout since its launch. We've got a fair few details from this call out in the wild now, most of them covered by Tom Henderson, and I think they're worth discussing in this video. There's a few statements that kind of raised my eyebrows, and then the whole thing just made me put my head in my hands. First of all, on the call, EA's Laura Miele, Chief Studios Officer, she openly admitted in the discussion that Battlefield 2042 failed to meet the expectations of players and also missed EA's own expectations for the game. And here I'm assuming she was referring to sales and to player numbers. This is something that EA did address in their recent earnings call with investors, where they also set out their delayed plans for content for the game. They pushed back the launch of Season 1 of the live service into the summer of 2022. Miele ended up highlighting several reasons that EA believes led to the situation that Battlefield finds itself in right now, with the Frostbite engine being a major one of those. According to Tom Henderson, a huge update occurred to the Frostbite engine that powers Battlefield as a franchise midway through development of Battlefield 2042. This was done supposedly to support the ambitions and the ideas that the team had for the game. According to Miele, she said, quote, "It was basically a new engine. They went back, the Frostbite version they were on was so old, they had to go back and update. So it was basically putting the game on a new engine," end quote. The process of upgrading the engine is rumored to have taken place over nearly 18 months of development time, which, if we look back, takes up a significant portion of the time that EA publicly acknowledged a new Battlefield project was being worked on. Late April 2020, the announcement came that Battlefield 5 support was being cancelled in the summer, allowing the DICE team to fully focus on their new title. So if you add 18 months from that initial announcement, you land in October 2021, and that's far too close to the launch of the game for an engine upgrade to be taking place. So I think we have to assume that this Frostbite engine upgrade, that was happening before the announcement that Battlefield 5 support was ending, meaning Battlefield 2042's development may well have been severely hampered by this Frostbite update for quite a significant period of time. Another reason mentioned to have played into Battlefield 2042's downfall was the continued working from home for the development team in the middle of the global pandemic. Teams not being able to have face-to-face meetings about major design decisions, not working in their teams close to one another, not having those day-to-day conversations, but instead having to do it all over Zoom. That can't have been easy. Many other games have suffered from the same issue, falling short of their usual quality and quantity goals because, well, conditions haven't really been ideal for making video games. And Miele on this point said, quote, "Add up all of this new innovation, all of this ambition for the new project, and then you add a global pandemic halfway through the project, where the game teams had to work from home, we ended up with more new variables in development than we have ever experienced before," end quote. To me, this is a valid reason to attribute to the poor launch in terms of stability and performance of Battlefield 2042. As I've said, many other games have suffered the same fate during the pandemic, and it's essentially become normal for games to launch in a fairly rough state over the last couple of years. But I don't think it's the reason that you can use when it comes to general direction and feeling of Battlefield 2042. Battlefield as a franchise, it has a formula, and for years since the beginning of the franchise, pretty much right up until Battlefield 5, I think you can say at the core, each game that's been released has had some key design pillars. And most of them follow rock, paper, scissors combat, you've got player agency and freedom, you've got this huge arsenal of weapons, vehicles and equipment to empower players and different playstyles, you've got epic scale with 64 players, these massive arenas of war. Each game has these parts to it, but they have their own flavour, and by and large they follow that Battlefield blueprint. But for some reason with Battlefield 2042, the blueprint has been massively watered down and in certain areas has been completely ignored. Battlefield 2042 sacrificed absolutely essential Battlefield elements like classes and swapped in specialists, chasing a trend being set by other FPS games on the market, and I think in an attempt to create a new way to make money from the game, selling skins. Battlefield 2042 pushed past the 64-player barrier for the very first time, and ended up sacrificing not only game performance, which has historically been very good in past Battlefield games, but also sacrificed massive levels of detail on each of the maps available in the game. The increased scale has led to hugely underwhelming building interiors, massive open areas in the middle of maps largely left unused by all the different players, and lackluster levels of destruction across the entire game. The increase in player count has also led to a big degradation in the quality of the gameplay on offer as well. There's no variety anymore, it's pretty much all or nothing. You've got like 12 friendlies versus 15 enemies, just fighting over one small location, and they're all cowering away from vehicles that are equipped with overpowered guns. Or you're just sprinting across open ground for 2 or 3 minutes trying to find the action. The pandemic certainly, circling back to what Miele has said, the pandemic has certainly had an impact on the overall performance of the game and the quality of the launch, but I don't think you can use the pandemic as an excuse for the extremely poor design decisions made when it comes to the core experience of Battlefield 2042. Miele acknowledged on the call that despite positive feedback from the open beta, there was also plenty of feedback regarding bugs, unpolished areas of the game, and generally poor performance of the game. Those weren't appropriately addressed for the launch, and according to Tom Henderson's article, Battlefield 2042's bug count was at a historic level for a DICE game prior to launch. It was believed, however, that the team behind the game would be able to handle this situation and work would be put in after launch to fix these issues. But as it's turned out, the team is really struggling to get a grip on the game. The February update that is due to deliver more bug fixes and the addition of a scoreboard, that's now been pushed back to March, and basic features such as in-game VoIP, they are still absent and without a launch date. Miele on the call went on to say, player expectations have changed when it comes to live service games, and that it wasn't the right choice to remain anchored to the company standards in comparison to previous DICE games. Essentially admitting here that they thought DICE could handle this game, but as it's turned out, things have gone well beyond their control at the moment. Now, interestingly, Halo Infinite got a mention during the town hall meeting as well, being cited as another major reason for Battlefield 2042's downfall. According to Laura Miele, EA didn't anticipate the multiplayer portion of Halo Infinite launching 3 weeks early. And I think this did actually come as a surprise to everybody really, but in hindsight it was actually a really smart move by Microsoft because it not only celebrated the 20th anniversary of the franchise for Halo, but also the multiplayer portion was always set to be free to play for Halo anyway, so there wasn't really anything to lose by letting it go out a little bit early. Miele stated on the call that because the Halo multiplayer ended up launching right next to Battlefield 2042, it highlighted just how rough Battlefield 2042 was. Halo Infinite, by comparison, had already been delayed for a year and had clearly benefited from that extra development time. Battlefield 2042, having gone through that huge engine upgrade and being based on some extremely shaky design decisions, it looked very weak by comparison. But that's just it. I think it's just a comparison. Halo Infinite standing next to Battlefield 2042 just makes it easier to see that Battlefield 2042 isn't that great a product and it doesn't have a huge amount of quality in it. Halo Infinite does by comparison. If you take Halo Infinite away, Battlefield 2042, unfortunately, is still a pretty poor product and doesn't have a huge amount of depth and doesn't have the quality that it should have. And let's just face it, if Battlefield 2042 had been an absolute gem at launch and launched alongside Halo Infinite, would we be in the position we are right now with the game? No, I don't think so. Miele went on to say that certain design decisions during development, such as the inclusion of specialists, did not align with player expectations. She said, quote, "Clearly, we didn't go wide enough with different player segments, and we certainly didn't go deep enough with the game. We didn't bring players along with us, which is a big miss for the development cycle and process of this game." End quote. Here, I believe she's alluding to not taking on proper feedback during the development process of the game, as they had done in the past for previous Battlefield games. Now, EA runs a full playtesting initiative, it's called EA Playtesting, where they bring in players from outside the company to playtest in development games and try and extract feedback from those people that they can use to make the game better for their target audience. They also run the EA Creator Network, formerly known as the EA Game Changers Network. full of people who play their games, create content around them, and manage their own communities. Now, I'm not part of EA playtesting, but I am part of the EA Creator Network, and it's my understanding that there was no outreach from DICE, EA, or anyone working on Battlefield 2042 during development towards the EA Creator Network to try and get feedback on what was being made. Can't speak for the EA playtesting side of things, but regardless of that, getting feedback from outside the bubble of development, outside of any situation in life really, that can be extremely valuable. Perhaps a point of view not previously considered is brought to light by talking to somebody. Perhaps you have a conversation with someone else and they raise a concern that hadn't been thought of before, or somebody suggests an improvement to a feature that could make the game better. Feedback in any scenario is very, very important. And if Battlefield 2042 at no point during development was fed back on by people outside the project, then it's no wonder that player expectations were missed. So this most recent reveal of information about Battlefield 2042, as I said in the intro, initially it made me raise my eyebrows because I was interested to hear what EA had to say, but once I'd read through it and thought about it a little bit more, it just really made me roll my eyes and just sort of put my head in my hands in exasperation. As a Battlefield fan, somebody who's been playing this franchise for close to 15 years now, these statements about missing player expectations and not taking on feedback during development, it just paints a picture of the leadership not really understanding Battlefield at all. Decisions like upgrading the Frostbite engine during development of the game, that's not understanding Battlefield. That's just got to be development suicide, surely. Imagine being told that you've already made something in one version of an engine, but there's a new one coming along, and the game is going to ship on that version of the engine, so you've got to do all your work over again on the new version, and the deadline to get it done is closer than it's ever been before. That doesn't sound like a good situation. Plus, I think you have to consider that the DICE team isn't the same team as it was 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. The studio has lost a huge amount of talent during that time. Veteran developers of the Battlefield franchise have moved on. Many of them moved on to other Stockholm-based studios like Embark, which was actually founded by ex-DICE and EA executive Patrick Soderlund, and he'd been at DICE and involved with Battlefield from the very beginning, all the way back in Battlefield 1942. Patrick Bark, a former general manager at DICE, he left the team some time ago and joined Ubisoft after being at DICE for several years. Then you've just got key figures in the development team that interacted with the community all the time, like David Serland and Jakob Ajmal. Both of them left and joined Sharkmob, based in Malmo. All of these team members, even ones that you don't know about, lots of them have been there for years. Some of them have been there for decades and had experience of the Battlefield franchise. And that's not to mention the amount of talent lost for people who worked on the Star Wars Battlefront franchise. Many key players there also left the studio after decisions were made to end support for Battlefront 2 and not to greenlight a Battlefront 3 project. So DICE 2021/2022, it is not the same DICE of 2011 or 2013. So to have the same expectations of that team, as Miele alluded to in the town hall meeting, that didn't end the way that EA hoped, but I think that's a pretty obvious issue to identify. It just seems only now, after the fact, after the game's launched, and all of these issues have become public, that the problems are being noticed. Then you've got changes like removing classes and implementing specialists, removing team play, and trying to boost the solo experience. Battlefield has always been a team-based shooter, and so the decision to actively reduce the team play presence in the game, I can only assume that decision has been driven by a leadership team that doesn't really understand Battlefield, or there was an overwhelming identification that specialists would be a far greater way to monetize the game experience through skins and outfits, and the idea of team play was just sort of pushed to one side. Going from 64 players to 128 players. That actually seems like a natural progression for Battlefield, and honestly, during the marketing campaign, I didn't really believe it was going to cause the issues that it has. However, when there is evidence already out there, and I didn't even realize this existed, that DICE had tested 128 players before for the Battlefield franchise, and they basically rejected it in the past, the decision then to plow onwards with the decision anyway, surely that has to be questioned. If previous DICE teams tried to boost the player numbers to 128 and then reported that testing that many players, the experience, quote, isn't fun, then why did this current DICE team and the leadership of this game believe any differently? What I'm trying to say is, clearly for EA and DICE here, they're talking about it in their town hall meeting, the warning signs were there during development. Certain design decisions were known to be controversial. Unprecedented development slowdowns and roadblocks put in place by the global pandemic really squeezed the development team. A game engine upgrade happened in the middle of development, causing absolute nightmares. Huge numbers of bugs and issues were known about before launch, higher than previous levels for Battlefield launches. But even knowing all of that, the decision was still made to move forwards and launch the game regardless. The town hall post-mortem that's happened has thrown up some really obvious and I think really avoidable issues during Battlefield 2042's development, and unfortunately, it's now the individual DICE developers who've got to go in, pick up the pieces, and try and salvage this situation somehow. It's the dedicated Battlefield fans who are left disappointed once again at the launch of a game from their favourite franchise. But this time the situation is really so bad that a comeback might not even be on the cards. We don't know what's going to happen really. Whatever the direction was for Battlefield 2042, whoever was calling the shots, unfortunately they got it really, really wrong. But I find it baffling that it appears they didn't see it coming. Right, that's it, I'm done. I hope you enjoyed the video. I certainly didn't enjoy making it, but I'll catch you next time.